The movie opens in a covert research laboratory, where we are introduced to a scientist named Richard and his team, who are engrossed in the development of an innovative invention. Catherine, a prominent businesswoman who is financing the project, is due to visit the lab. Upon her arrival, Richard directs his assistant, Reese, to park Catherine's car while he escorts Catherine to the research facility. Once inside the facility, the experiment is initiated on Richard's command. The experiment involves Catherine's car. The lab technicians incrementally increase the electrical current, which results in the car gradually fading from sight until it eventually disappears completely. However, when the current is reduced, the car reappears. Catherine is visibly astounded by this. Richard announces that he has finally achieved the invention of invisibility, implying that he can make any object vanish. Suddenly, the project begins to malfunction, accompanied by a loud noise. Concurrently, a private plane takes off from a location 19 kilometers away from the research facility. The pilot notices an electrical anomaly on the runway. Unexpectedly, a portal materializes in front of him, out of which emerges a massive warship. The plane collides with the warship and explodes. Simultaneously, complications arise in the lab, resulting in the complete disappearance of Catherine's car. The scene then transitions to a cafe, where we see a sheriff named Carl engaging in lighthearted banter with a cafe worker named Molly. In fact, they were on the verge of getting married when the sheriff learned about the plane crash over the radio and was summoned to the scene. The cafe owner overhears the same message, causing Molly to become concerned. Meanwhile, Catherine queries Richard, "How did you manage to develop this invisibility technology so quickly?" He explains that the technology was initially developed in 1942 but remained unused. Just as they were about to depart, Richard's assistant rushes in to inform them that the loud noise they heard was actually a ship from the World War II era that had fallen onto the runway. This revelation leaves both of them in a state of surprise. Meanwhile, when Carl arrives at the airport, he is taken aback by the sight of a massive ship. This was no ordinary ship. It was a famous vessel that had mysteriously vanished at sea during World War II and has now reappeared. The ship was known as the Eldridge. Inside the ship, a man named Bill regains consciousness. He struggles to rise from his seat as his shoes are stuck to the ship. With great effort, he manages to stand and begins to search for his companions on the ship. To his horror, he finds all his companions bound to the ship, lifeless and statue-like. This sight fills him with dread. Outside the ship, Carl informs Molly about the Eldridge over the phone. A peculiar light is seen flickering around the ship. When Bill touches this light from within the ship, he is ejected out. Conversely, when Carl touches the light from outside, he is transported inside the ship. Molly arrives at the scene shortly after, and a local worker informs her that Carl has entered the ship. Suddenly, the ship's light begins to flicker intensely, and the ship vanishes, taking Carl with it. Meanwhile, Bill, who had been expelled from the ship, finds himself in the city. He is bewildered by the modern world, as he had traveled from the era of World War II, specifically 1942, to the present day. Bill then spots a newspaper and is taken aback when he sees the date, the 27th of August, 2012. He becomes visibly agitated. He notices Molly's coffee shop nearby and steps inside. He requests a coffee from Lena, a worker at the shop. Bill then inquires about how to get in touch with the Navy, as he needs to return to his own time. Lena advises him that he can reach out to them via the Navy's website. Bill is perplexed by these modern concepts, but chooses to remain silent. He then asks Lena about a woman named Mary Gardner. Lena informs him that she knew a woman by that name, but she passed away a long time ago. However, she is acquainted with Mary's granddaughter, Molly Gardner, and proceeds to share details about her. Subsequently, Bill departs from the coffee shop. Lena then contacts Molly to inform her that a military man had been inquiring about her grandmother. In the meantime, Richard, who was en route somewhere with Catherine, is informed that the generator in his lab is producing an excessive amount of power and is becoming unstable. Simultaneously, Bill begins to experience an electrical shock, and a massive portal opens up in the Chicago skyline. The ship descends from the portal and becomes lodged in a building. Carl remains trapped inside the ship. When he regains consciousness, he realizes that his hand is embedded in the ship's wall. After some time, Bill arrives at the house of Molly's grandmother, where Molly is taken aback to see him. Bill then reveals to her that he is, in fact, her grandfather, who had mysteriously vanished with the ship 7 decades ago in 1942. Molly's grandmother had spent the last 70 years searching for him. Upon learning this, Molly discloses that her grandmother passed away 3 years prior, but she had continued her search for him until her last breath. This revelation deeply saddens Bill. Determined to rectify the situation, Bill resolves to mend everything so that he can return to his own time. After some time, Molly conducts an online search and informs Bill that following the disappearance of his ship in 1942, the government had auctioned off all the wartime artifacts to a company named Greyguard, which is actually Richard's company. Richard, on the other hand, discloses to Catherine that their endeavor was essentially a time travel project, first tested in 1942. However, during the project, their generator became overloaded, leading to a gravitational fluctuation. This caused a rift in the fabric of time and space, and through this wormhole, the Eldridge ship was transported from 1942 directly to 2012. Upon investigating the ship, they discover that a human has survived on board. The individual who survived the ship was, in fact, the chief technician of the Salinger team, a group that had been working on this time travel project. In the meantime, Molly provides her grandfather, who is now in the present day, with some contemporary clothing. During their conversation, she reveals that she is engaged to a man named Cal, who vanished while investigating the same ship. In the midst of their discussion, a government agent named Hagen arrives at Molly's residence and inquires about Bill. Hagen proceeds to enter the house and begins searching for Bill. However, Bill surprises him with an attack from behind. The pair manage to escape from the house. It is at this point that it is revealed that Catherine had dispatched Hagen with the intention of eliminating Bill. We then see Catherine issuing orders to her Special Forces team to enter the ship with the objective of completely obliterating it. Simultaneously, Richard's assistant alerts Richard that the generator within the ship, which was integral to the time travel project, has begun to operate at an intense rate. This could potentially indicate that the ship is preparing to move again. Despite this warning, Catherine does not instruct her team to retreat. Meanwhile, Molly and Bill arrive at Lena's cafe. They borrow her car and some money before setting off for 6th Avenue. Upon their arrival, Bill begins to experience an electrical shock once more. Coinciding with this, the Eldridge starts to generate power, causing the ship to vanish yet again. Carl remains trapped within the ship. He attempts to make a missed call to Molly. When Molly notices the missed call, she is filled with joy as she believes that Carl is still alive. In a bid to rescue Carl, Bill informs Molly that they need to seek out Morton Salinger, the initiator of this project back in 1942. Concurrently, Richard and Catherine are speculating about the potential location where the ship might reappear. Catherine is considering obliterating the ship with a bomb to halt the recurring loop. However, Richard cautions her that detonating a nuclear bomb could cause the generator within the ship to rupture the space-time continuum once more, potentially leading to the engulfment of our planet. Despite his warning, Catherine remains skeptical. Meanwhile, Molly and Bill set out to meet Morton, the project's chief who is now elderly. Morton is taken aback upon seeing Bill, as it signifies the success of his time travel project. He reveals that he had been experimenting with time travel technology on the ship in 1942. However, the ship vanished and the project was subsequently abandoned. The company, Greyhound, had then sold off the project. 2 decades prior, Greyhound had resumed work on this project, with Morton also participating. Catherine learns through Hagen that Bill has sought out Morton Salinger, the inventor of the time travel technology. Consequently, she orders Hagen to eliminate both Morton and Molly. Richard, however, is opposed to the idea of killing Morton, the mastermind behind the technology. He attempts to dissuade Catherine, but his pleas fall on deaf ears. Morton then escorts them to the Salinger team's laboratory. En route, he explains that 42 years ago, when the generator on the ship was activated, Bill became linked to the ship, which is why he keeps experiencing electrical shocks. He also mentions that the likelihood of Carl being trapped on the ship is quite slim. In the midst of this, Hagen and his men arrive and launch an attack. Morton retaliates by detonating his car with a laser trap, but Hagen manages to survive the blast. During the ensuing chaos, Morton sustains severe injuries. Before succumbing to his wounds, he informs Bill about another scientist who could potentially help him return to 1942. Following this revelation, Bill and Molly make their escape. As soon as they leave, Hagen executes Morton. Bill and Molly find refuge on the highway, but the appearance of the Eldridge ship triggers a surge of power within Bill, causing him to explode a car. The police arrive on the scene to apprehend Bill, but they manage to evade capture by fleeing in a van. Meanwhile, Catherine initiates an assault on the Eldridge using fighter jets. However, the ship's electric field renders the attack futile. Suddenly, the Eldridge ship disappears and re-emerges at a nuclear plant in England. A massive explosion occurs as the plant is damaged. Concurrently, Bill and Molly arrive at the Salinger Research Center, only to discover that all the scientists there have perished. Molly spots some research laptops and begins to make her exit. However, they are ambushed by Hagen and his team. They open fire on Bill, but much like the ship, he is shielded by an electrical force. He uses this same force to retaliate against them. In the midst of the ensuing battle, Richard, who was en route to the Salinger lab, spots Bill. He urges Bill to accompany him, interrupting the ongoing conflict. During their journey, he informs his companion that the ship is essential if they wish to travel back in time. Meanwhile, Catherine discovers Richard's betrayal. Richard then brings Molly and Bill to his research facility. He explains to them that the ship is necessary for their time travel mission and that it must be brought to the laboratory. Subsequently, he activates all his generators. As a result, Bill begins to experience electrocution once again. Due to the gravitational force generated, the ship materializes in their lab. As soon as the ship appears, Bill is instantly drawn into it. Simultaneously, Catherine arrives at the location and, in conjunction with the ship, commands the complete destruction of the research center. She justifies her actions by stating that they are carried out under the president's orders. In the process, she kills Richard and leaves him wounded. Inside the same ship, Bill encounters Carl, who was previously trapped. Utilizing his abilities, he manages to liberate Carl. However, Hagen also boards the ship and launches an attack on Bill. Meanwhile, outside the ship, Molly appears and shoots Catherine without hesitation. Following Catherine's directive, a nuclear missile is launched towards the research center. In the midst of this chaos, Bill manages to evacuate Carl from the ship. Upon exiting the ship, Carl is overjoyed to reunite with Molly. Upon witnessing the scene, the gravitational force in the vicinity intensifies significantly, leading to the formation of a massive vortex in the sky. This vortex, in addition to pulling the ship, also draws in the aeroplane carrying the nuclear missile. In the midst of this chaos, Carl and Molly manage to escape from the area. Once the ship departs, the vortex eventually closes, restoring calm. As the movie concludes, we see Molly in the company of her grandfather, Bill, who has aged considerably. This indicates that Bill was successful in his quest to travel back in time and had lived out his life with his wife.